Hello and welcome to On the Line, Perspectives on Partition with me, Paul McFadden. In this series of programmes organised by the Bloody Sunday Trust, guests from various walks of life share their views on one of the most contentious events in modern history, the partition of the island 100 years ago. Our guest today is the SDLP leader and Foyle MP Colum Eastwood. Colum, thanks very much indeed for joining us and agreeing to go on the record with your thoughts on the line, the border, which sort of lends its name to the title of the series. I'd like to begin, if you don't mind, with a quote just from very, very recent history, actually. One of your new rivals as political leaders in Northern Ireland, Edwin Poots, said just after his election, "I'm looking forward to a positive relationship right across Northern Ireland with my party colleagues and indeed with people from other parties. The opportunities for Northern Ireland are great. The opportunities for us to make Northern Ireland a great place after this 100 years has passed and we move into a new 100 years." How likely are we, in your opinion, to be celebrating a second centenary of Northern Ireland as a state within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
Well, I suppose it's probably not the most outlandish thing that Edwin's ever said, but it's definitely a very optimistic position. I would be frankly shocked if Northern Ireland in its current form sees another 10 years. I think we are in the end game in terms of Northern Ireland as an entity within the United Kingdom. I think we're moving towards a new Ireland, and that's not I'm not saying that in any kind of gloating way. I just think that is the direction of travel. I think it's a very good thing. But we have an enormous amount of work to do and an enormous amount of building to do. I don't disagree with Edwin, by the way, that we should be trying to make Northern Ireland a great place and all of that. I just think we can make it a better place by changing how we run the place.
You talk about, it's interesting, a new Ireland. You're not talking about, you're not using the phrase a united Ireland. I'm assuming you obviously want to see United Ireland, but is a new Ireland subtly different from what people normally have in their mind when they think of a United Ireland?
Well, it is a United Ireland, is what we're talking about. But I think the SDLP have always talked about a new Ireland. We've been talking about a new Ireland since the very early 70s, because we want to, instill in the conversation, get people thinking differently about what it would look like. There's been, I think, a very simplistic view about what any future constitutional setup would look like. But when we talk about a new Ireland, the whole point of that is to, insist, frankly, that it's about bringing people together. Obviously, bringing the two territories together within the one territory, but bringing people together at its core. Because we're not talking about winning a referendum. What we're talking about is building a nation, and that takes an awful lot of work. And if it's going to be a nation that we want people to buy into, then it has to be one that recognises the unionist and British traditions on this island. And I frankly don't think it'll be worth having unless we can make those parts of what makes us all up core to the future. And so that's why we have to do an awful lot of work and be very challenging of ourselves to make sure that that tradition, that British unionist culture and tradition has its place within a new Ireland as we talk about.
I do have to say that one of the striking things about this series has been the emergence of a consensus almost regarding the need for a conversation to begin. I mean, when you're talking about building a nation, the phrase you used there, I mean, that's a mammoth enterprise. And in a sense, I suppose the scale of that task is recognised in your party's launch very, very only this month, the launch of the first of the New Ireland Commission panels. I mean, that's a recognition, isn't it, of the complexity of the task it lies ahead?
It is. I think we have to remember, and we can learn an awful lot from the Scottish experience, and it's a totally different situation. But Scotland had something like the Yes campaign had something like 900 pages of a document going into every aspect of what an independent Scotland would look like, what it would do, how it would be ordered. And they still lost, fairly significantly lost that campaign. And a lot of people I know were very closely involved in all of that. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that. First lesson is we have to do our homework. We have to make it a very simple decision for people when the referendum comes. We have to answer all the hard questions: what the health service would look like, how the economy would be ordered, what happens to Stormont, all of that, how we really fully embrace that unionist British tradition in a new All Ireland arrangement. That was never done in the 26 counties. There was one version of history told, and it's only in recent years, when people are looking back on the centenaries of 1916 and everything else, that there's maybe a more nuanced conversation being had about how all of that came about. So we had an enormous task, I think. And remember, the two parts of this island grew up separately and differently and at different paces and at very different experiences. So we can't just pretend it's just going to be mashed together in one go. We also have the Good Friday Agreement, which recognises, I think, that even if we vote for a constitutional change, that we have to put in place all of the protections that we put in place for minorities in the north. I mean, the enormous work is put into protecting what was the nationalist minority within the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement. But we need to think about how all that would operate in an All Ireland setup. Will there be a Stormont? I think there actually should be a Stormont, as frustrating as Stormont can be and as critical as I am of it almost every day. I think we need to have a place that recognises that this place is slightly different. And all of that's important. We have to answer all the economic questions. But again, what I would like to have at the end of this is a very positive prospectus for change. And I would encourage unionists actually to come up with a positive prospectus for the United Kingdom. I think we'll win the argument. But that's the best way to do it. That's what's envisaged in the Good Friday Agreement. It isn't about United Ireland, yes or no. It's about UK or United Ireland. And unionism, I think, would be much better placed rather than kind of burying their head in the sand about this conversation that's clearly happening across our communities and across the island. They should be building a positive prospectus for staying in the United Kingdom. And I think we have a more positive story to tell, particularly since Brexit, because I'm sure you want to get into this, but I think a lot of people, particularly young people from all different backgrounds, want to be part of that open, progressive world that's almost symbolized by membership of the European Union, and surely we want to get back to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many questions raised by what you can say. I mean, you mentioned the B word, Brexit there. Just, I mean, this series it's about partition in a sense, but just when you look at the two of them, kind of in terms of historical impact, one obviously much more recent than the other, but which of the two has been the more seismic in political terms on this island, partition or Brexit?
Well, I suppose if you look back at the time of partition, what became the Republic of Ireland and the Free State, first of all, was leaving the biggest economic bloc in the world, the British Empire. Many people would have argued that it was going to be, a very Catholic state run by, big Roman influence. That did happen. And now we have, after Brexit, Northern Ireland leaving the biggest trading bloc in the world, the European Union, and the Republic of Ireland going very quick in terms of liberalising their laws and social policy. So it's kind of been flipped on its head. Partition is obviously the most seismic event that we have faced, because all of the things that came after, the systematic discrimination, the violence that came after that, and all the work that had to be done to bring people back together again, and we're still not there. But Brexit, I think, has been, by the way, I think we'd be having this conversation anyway, but it's been fast forwarded by Brexit, because people are just, furious, frankly. The decisions being taken in England about immigration, really, and very little else, are affecting people in Scotland who didn't vote for Brexit, affecting people in Northern Ireland who didn't vote for Brexit. And I just think people are sick of that. They don't want to be part of a body politic that is driven by English nationalism. How could we, whether you're unionist or nationalist or other, or feel yourself Irish or British, how could you be from this place, allowing yourself to be driven by a version of the world that is English nationalism? It doesn't make any sense. And I think there's a growing number of people now who see themselves not necessarily in the traditional way that some of us would see ourselves as Irish nationalists or British unionists or Ulster unionists. They see themselves in this new category of kind of Northern Irish and more, more open, and will move around and vote for different parties across the spectrum. Those people, first of all, I think they'll decide the future of the constitutional setup, but I do think they will. I think they'll be much more attracted, particularly young people, to a more positive, from my perspective anyway, version of the world, to be part of that progressive, outward-looking European Union, and that's much more attractive to me than something run by Boris Johnson.
I'm wondering what you say to those people. And there is a significant number of them, people who are unionists, who absolutely identify as British, who are keen for the union to survive, keen to see that second centenary that I mentioned at the outset there. People who are furious, to use a word that you used a moment ago there, who are furious about things like the erection of the border in the Irish Sea, a consequence of what they would see as EU bullying in relation to the whole Brexit enterprise. What do you say to people like that, who certainly do not envisage their future in the kind of Ireland you talked about at the outset?
Well,
the new Ireland.
I'd say a couple of things. First of all, I absolutely respect their position. There's nothing wrong with being a unionist and holding that view. And people, if there is a new Ireland, United Ireland, people won't stop being unionists. I mean, I never stopped being a nationalist, even though we lived under the in the UK. But I would also say to them this: the protocol is a result, and the border in the Irish Sea is not a result of EU bullying or anything else. It's a result of Brexit, and the particular type of Brexit that was pursued by Boris Johnson, not Theresa May, Boris Johnson, and supported by the DUP, which is bizarre because it was only ever going to end up one way. So the minute that the British government decided they wanted to leave the customs union and single market, there had to be a border somewhere. They didn't have to choose that. They could have had Brexit, but a soft economic Brexit. They could have had a hard political Brexit, but a soft economic Brexit. Decided not to have that. They knew it was never going to be possible. Even if you take all the history and all the politics out of it, it would be physically impossible to seal the border on the island of Ireland, and it would have created even more economic upheaval and more difficulty in terms of trade, just because of the geography of it. So that was never going to happen, and they knew this, and many of us pointed it out to them the whole way along that it wouldn't happen. So the only other logical position to hold is that there would have to be some checks in the Irish Sea. Now, you could get rid of 80% of those checks tomorrow if the British government decided to support a veterinary agreement. They'd be gone. But they're not even doing that. So the British government who say they're really angry about the protocol, which they negotiated and voted for and pushed through Parliament, they're not even doing anything really to try and fix the problems. I understand how unionists feel. I understand that that is a real sense of loss to have this big difference between here and GB. But people should ask themselves this question: who did it? It was the British government who let you down all the time, and it was the DUP. So, I mean, relying on the DUP or the British government to look after your interests has failed every single time you've tried it. So I think there's much more to gain from working across, political lines here to build up our economy, to protect our citizens, to do all those things, but to work together on this island. Nobody else has our interests at heart. Nobody else. It is only people here working together that can resolve our problems. It's always been the case, but it has been demonstrably the case over the past number of years post-Brexit, where they have literally where they've literally sold unionist people down the river, and at the same time, the DUP, who are supposed to be rowing the boat, have thrown the oars overboard, and it is actually astonishing that that's how they have approached this position, to be led by the nose by the right wing of the Tory party rather than protecting their own citizens. So I think, I mean, there's very diminishing returns these days in being connected to London.
Is a border down the Irish Sea a price that we'll always have to pay for the foreseeable future, in your opinion? Is that one of the prices of Brexit? Albeit that, you know, that 80% of the problems could be removed almost at the stroke of a pen, but not all of them. Not all of them.
So is it a border? What it is, there are checks on goods. There are no checks on human beings traveling. I don't like borders anywhere, frankly. I mean, I think it doesn't make any sense for Britain to be pursuing this global Britain, frankly, nonsense trade policy. You don't leave the biggest trading bloc in the world. It's just not very clever. And of course, what they told us during the referendum was that they really just wanted out of the political overreach. They liked being in the single market and customs union, but then they threw all that out as well. I think they're going to live to regret that economically. But right now, if they continue to choose to be in a different trading bloc than, you know, the island of Ireland, which is effectively in the single market, all of us, then that's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. There are things we can do to mitigate, like a veterinary agreement and all of that, but they have to want to do that. But you know, there are realities, there are consequences of big economic trading maneuvers. You know, so if you remove yourself from a trading bloc, there are consequences from that. You know, and you can't just have your cake and eat it. So I think people should just ask themselves the question, keep asking themselves the question: where do your interests lie? And they clearly don't lie with, you know, English nationalism.
You get the eyeball, the main players in this when you're at Westminster. You know, from this remove, I'm looking at it's hard not to have the very strong feeling that people like Boris Johnson desperately want to keep hold of Scotland. I mean, that's a very important part of the union for them. Do they have the same feeling, the same strength of feeling where Northern Ireland is concerned, in your opinion, from what you see, what you hear?
Absolutely not. First of all, they don't understand Northern Ireland, and they don't really make any effort to educate themselves on Northern Ireland. And in many conversations I've had with Boris Johnson over the past couple of years, he literally does not understand, and he doesn't care. He does not have a grasp of the detail at all, and he's never bothered to try and to educate himself on the detail. I mean, it would astonish you how disconnected he is from the issues that people here are facing, and it's just slogan after slogan after slogan. They're very concerned about Scotland going, but I genuinely don't think it would bother them one bit if we left tomorrow.
Really?
Yeah, no, that doesn't go for everybody, but the people who are running the British government at the moment they're uber focused on kind of keeping Scotland in the union. I think they'll mess that up, and they will lose that referendum when it eventually comes. And you can't keep having a majority of people voting for a referendum and then denying it to them. So that will come at some point, and I think Scotland will go independently. That's for the Scottish people to decide, but I think that's what will happen. And I think they're very, very concerned about that. They are, you know, they will pretend that they're concerned about Northern Ireland, but you know, how do you act in the way that they have over the past number of years, and then pretend that you care about the union? Everything they've done has been to undermine the position of the union and Northern Ireland's position within it. So, I mean, I think there's plenty of evidence to say that they don't really care.
How soon do you expect to see a referendum or a border poll taking place in Northern Ireland?
Well, I think the UK is ending, and I think there's a massive job now to manage that process and manage relationships and continue to build, you know, the shared home place that Seamus Mallon used to talk about. And you know, remember that, you know, there's two communities up here. There's more communities here now, and we've kind of both been orphaned from our respective parents, for want of a better term. So there's a lot of work to do to manage all of that. But I do think that before the end of this decade, there'll be a referendum on the future constitutional position. I resist very strongly, you know, calls for border poll now and an exact time, because if we're being honest, We haven't done the work yet. That's why we've appointed the New Ireland Commission, the first panel on that. And we have people from, you know, with former Presbyterian moderator, former blanket man, we have loads of real experts and really quality people who will challenge us, challenge our thinking, and don't agree with us on everything. So we're going to do that work. I hope others do the same, and that we can come at that at the end with something worth selling to people. But I would just encourage fellow nationalists to focus on doing the work, and don't focus on calling for a border poll now, because it's not very strategic, because the British government have control over this timeline as per the Good Friday Agreement. And I think that should be changed to 2 governments, but that's where we are right now. They could call a border poll at any time if they felt that it would advantage the unionist cause. So our job, I think, is to do the work, have the conversations, listen to our unionist neighbours, and listen to people from all backgrounds who have big concerns and worries, and deal with all of that. But I do think, in practical terms, I think it will happen before the end of the decade. In fairly, Aaron has suggested the 30th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which would be 2008. That may be the date that's settled on, but whatever happens, we have to get on with doing the work now, and we're absolutely focused on that. That is our mission, and it will be rooted and grounded in how do we make society better for people. Because I think the only way to sell this to people, particularly people who, like, I'd vote for it no matter what, and there are many other people like me, but the people who are going to decide this will decide it on the basis of, will it make them poorer? Will it make them better off? Will this place be fairer? Will their children have more opportunity? Will we be able to get rid of immigration? And I think that's the basis on which we can sell a very positive vision for the future. And so the work that we're going to do is going to be grounded in those bread and butter economic and social issues. I think that if we can prove then that by doing that, it'll be better to have a new constitutional setup, an all Ireland setup. I think we can definitely sell something to people, and we will win the referendum. And I don't want to do this twice. I want one referendum and I want it over, because however we do it, this will be a traumatic experience. We just know that. We can make it less traumatic by having a proper democratic discussion about it, by doing our homework in advance, but it will be difficult, no matter what. We have to understand that. We have to understand that people have a deep, emotional, familial connection to being part of the UK. We should understand that, because we have a similar connection to Dublin. So we need to be able to manage all of that emotion and difficulty. I think it can be done. I think it should be done. It's a democratic right of people to decide their own future, and it's in the Good Friday Agreement. But we should not underestimate the scale of this task.
It's interesting that the list of things that you mentioned there, that people would weigh up before sort of making up their minds, apart from those who are sort of wedded just one way or the other, and have been all their lives. One thing you neglected to mention there was the health service, which in Northern Ireland terms has performed heroically in the course of the pandemic. And it's the one thing, I think, when I have talked to people who would be regarded as, you know, the old perceived nationalist line, it's the one thing people mention as something that would really, really cause them to hesitate on the question of how they might vote on a border poll.
Yeah, I think it's a huge issue, and if people thought they had to pay to go and see their GP, that could destroy the campaign. The Republic is moving towards the slanted care model, much more universal healthcare and all of that. But I also think we have to be honest about our health service in the North. Doctors and nurses and porters and all the people who were involved in managing the pandemic and managing the vaccination program, as you say, have been absolutely heroic. But the system is absolutely broken. It is on its knees, and we can't pretend otherwise. The waiting lists in the North would make a developing country blush. I mean, they're terrible. They're much worse than they are in the South, much worse than they are in England. They're really, really bad. We have a massive structural problem in our health service, largely down to the fact that, you know, successive governments in Stormont haven't grasped the nettle of reorganising the health service in the north. So yes, people want the best possible health service. They want it free at the point of delivery. That has to be an absolute right. But I think if you get into the weeds in this conversation, and a number of people who come through my office who are waiting 4 and 5 years to see a consultant, I'm not sure the experience of, even when people get into the health service, it's the best experience in the world. But even getting to it, if you have, if you have an issue that needs dealt with, it is not that simple. It just isn't. And doctors and nurses and NHS administrators will tell you the same thing. But people I speak to every single day in Derry and elsewhere have a real difficulty in getting access. Maybe free, but they can't get access, or they have to wait years. And many people are having to go into debt and go private and all that stuff. So it isn't the panacea that it sometimes made out to be. But the principle of free at the point of delivery should be non-negotiable in any future state, and that's work that the South has to do to get themselves to that point.
Yeah, I want to go back on one thing you said earlier on. I mean, the fact that you would like to see both governments having a say as to when a referendum or border poll might be called. Does the fact that power resides with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, that one individual in the text of the agreement, was that a weakness in the original Good Friday Agreement, do you think?
It's a huge weakness. And when I've spoken to people who were there, and basically the answer you get is that they'd all negotiated so hard and so much that they were afraid of opening anything else up at the end, and didn't want to be seen to be over negotiating on that point. It is a weakness, but the agreement has been changed quite a number of times, mostly for the worse. There's a review mechanism within the agreement that I actually think we should be triggering anyway, to look at how it has all worked and what we need to change. But it doesn't make any sense. So you need to have a referendum in the south, a referendum in the north, and most readings of the agreement would say that they have to be on the same day. How can the British government kind of force the Irish government to have a referendum on any given day? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Surely, given the nature of the agreement, which is based upon the two governments being the co-guarantors of the agreement, the consent principle within it is probably the most important thing in the agreement, because it gave a democratic route for constitutional change and undermined the position of the IRA, for example, who said the only way to do it was violence. So it makes no sense one government or the other would be making that decision on their own. That has to be a discussion and a negotiation between two governments. And there are issues as well about how the criteria is what criteria is used to decide and all of that. But I think these are things that can be resolved. And I think both governments should realise that it's in their interest actually to have a managed process here that makes some sense, rather than knee-jerk reactions at any given point.
You know what? A union, as someone who was completely wedded to the idea of being in union, and almost into perpetuity with England, Scotland, and Wales, would probably be quite unnerved by the tenor of your remarks at the moment, because you're so convinced, I think, that things are going to change significantly, and in only in one direction in the course of this decade. That I'm wondering what that might do in terms of a possible return of violence in the north. I mean, we've heard talk about that in recent days at committee meetings at Westminster. Many people horrified to hear that kind of talk, but that kind of talk has been happening nonetheless. Is it something that you would be concerned about as we move in that kind of direction?
I think we always have to be concerned about the, peace is fragile. We always have to be concerned about that. And I know, like I've annoyed some people over the past few months about saying that, I think the UK is ending and all of that. That's an analysis. I think it's kind of hard to argue with, but it's an analysis that I have made. And it's a particular moment post-Brexit actually happening. And I think it's important that we're honest with people about that. I'm not saying it's inevitable. I'm just saying it's, in my view, this is where we're going to end up, and that I feel you know, an enormous sense of responsibility to plan for it, to work towards it, but also to, you know, spend an awful lot of time listening to unionist people. We've tasked every one of our elected representatives over the last 6 or so months to go out and speak to and listen to as many people from, you know, the different tradition as possible, and that will run through everything that we do through the New Ireland Commission. That's why we've put so many people from a unionist tradition, the unionist tradition, on it. So we're determined that we, whilst I have a view in the Constitution, whilst I have a kind of an expectation about what might happen, and a view about how that will all unfold, I also think we have a massive responsibility to manage it, and that's why I say all that. So, but in terms of violence, I don't foresee, given the way in which the world has moved on, I don't foresee anybody on any side being able to mount a sustained campaign of violence. I think that the experience of dissident Republicans has probably taught us that it is impossible in the modern world with all the technological and intelligence advantages. But, you know, who would loyalists be fighting with? I mean, if we're talking about allowing, and of course, consent was always a unionist demand forever. You know, it was always, unionists always wanted the consent principle enshrined. If the people decide something, then, you know, it has to happen. And whatever side you're on, you win or lose, that's democracy. So I think we should all get ourselves into that headspace. I know it's difficult. I know it's emotional. I know people have a great attachment, but we need to, I think, as the proponents of change, need to be almost stretching ourselves beyond as far as the elastic will go to accommodate the British tradition on this island. And we will have to challenge ourselves. We will have to challenge Dublin massively, because there's a coziness there about what that state looks like now. It'll have to be absolutely overhauled. And we have to think things that maybe we weren't prepared to think before. So that's the challenge ahead of us. I think this can all be done. I think it can all be managed. I think it can be done in a democratic and peaceful way. And you know, we've been through worse, and I think we've proven that the only route to anything is democracy and peace.
Just one final question to you, and it sounds like an unkind kind of a question, and I don't mean it to be, but I think back to that time when Arlene Foster memorably said that in the event of United Ireland, she would event of United Ireland, she'd probably leave Northern Ireland. Do you think you could persuade someone like Arlene Foster, a woman you've known, a woman you've crossed swords with politically? Do you think you could convince someone like Arlene Foster to stay in the new Ireland that you envisage happening in the not too distant future?
Well, the reality is, whatever happens, you know, whether we don't we're going to New Ireland or not, we still have to find a way of working together and sharing this piece of ground. You know, where Arlene's family have probably been here 400 years. I mean, why would we, you know, why would they leave now? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I don't think people like Arlene would leave. This is her home. And what we have to do is make sure everybody understands that this is their home and we want to share it. You know, and we're not waiting, by the way, for constitutional change to share this place. There's still a lot of work to be doing right now to make this place much more reconciled, bring people together, and just stop the culture wars. You know, work together, work the institutions, and work the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. That has to be done right now. Whatever the constitutional setup is, we have to learn to share this place much better than we're doing now. And I frankly don't believe, if we do this right, if we handle it sensitively, if we put the unionist concerns and traditions front and centre, I think this can be a place that people will want to come to, never mind leave.
Colum, we should plenty of food for thought in the last half hour or so. So thanks very much indeed for joining us, taking part in this series, and for agreeing to go on the line with your thoughts on partition and all that has ensued in the 100 years since then. Thanks for joining us.